How's it going, Mike?
Oh, hello there. It's going pretty
Hey,
well. How are you?
good.
Good. We actually finished sorting all of the eggnog this weekend that we made,
Oh,
so
did
that
you
was good.
really?
Yep.
Nice.
Oh yeah, I like put it all into like really large bottles at first to kind of like consolidate it, and then we started like individually packing it until we got like little bottles for everybody.
Oh man, that's awesome. That's so cool. I'm super excited.
Oh yeah, it was good. I tested it. I didn't take much from the batch, but obviously I tested it and it came out. I'm pretty happy with how it came out.
Yeah. So, do you guys do this every year, or is this like a new thing you're?
I've been doing it for like the past 3 years now.
Okay. Yep.
So and it's like a lot of my friends really like it, so I'm pretty happy with it. I've gotten
Yeah,
a lot of
yeah.
compliments on it. So
Awesome. That's cool. I didn't remember that the Christmas party was at 4 p.m. I was like, wow, it's nice and early.
yeah, oh yeah. Well, fortunately, they're all gonna be in like these little bottles that have like these clasps on it, so like people can kind of like take it and do whatever they want with it. Like I'm gonna keep it in a cooler, so like once somebody
Okay.
takes it from me, like as long as you get it like in the fridge within like normal, like a decent amount of time, it'll be fine.
Yeah, yeah.
I
We
can
should.
keep it in the cooler until the end.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know, right? That's what I'm thinking. I'm like, we should
It's
bring
probably gonna be
a
like as
cooler.
people like leave type of thing.
Right, 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 right. Yeah, no, that's great. That's awesome. Um, all right, guys. I'm gonna get started.
Hmm.
Um, we are really nearing the end of this. Um, I want to go over progressives today, but I also want to begin going over the questions, just doing practice questions for the exam. It probably would be helpful to have that in a separate, like, its own like meeting, but I don't know, it'll just be kind of whenever we get to it in this one. So I'm gonna try to move relatively quickly, so that we don't spend too much time on progressives because there is some stuff on progressives on the test, but it's a little bit more just like stuff like I think you guys should know and just, kind of stuff that's actually not really on the test related to that. But let me get going here. I have a million. I'm noticing the huge mess behind me too. So I have like every frame we've ever made on the bed behind me. So it's a good backdrop. We're working on getting them photographed so that we can put them up on a website. So that's the reason they're all there. But okay, so let's begin with a couple things about progressives. I did, as usual, I'm just going to kind of do a whiteboard so that I can put some little uh, snippets up. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, so big things that you're gonna need to be comfortable with for the test, but things that in general you should know anyway is the whole idea of the markings on progressives. So I'll show you a couple images of what these look like and how you can find these when someone comes in with a progressive or when you get it back from the lab. But the big points here are that there are etchings in progressives, and they'll tell you things like the add power. Which is very helpful if you don't have the lab slip. Also, when edging, you're going to have little tiny circles. This is not the best image for that, but kind of where you see, the little E looking thing here and then the zero over here. There will be circles there. And when you get a lens back from a lab and you need to put it into a frame, those etchings are what you're going to look for in order to place it correctly on your lens blocker and thus get it to the right height when you cut it. So those are super important. There are also markings that tell you who the manufacturer is, and exactly what lens it is. And then the fitting cross is arguably the most important part of this. This little X is, or sorry, plus is where the pupil would go. And this little marking that goes around here is going to tell you, going to be kind of the best distance vision. Like if you're thinking about the optical center of a single vision lens, this would be kind of the equivalent for a progressive lens. It's really where you're going to want that person to be primarily looking through for the distance. And then the little circle down here is the near area. So you can see that that's inset a little bit to the nose side, to the nasal side, because when people look up close, their eyes converge, they come together. So as you guys already know, the distance PD is always going to be bigger than the near PD, and you can see that same idea in effect here with the near area, kind of the place where the near power would be in full effect. So those are really important markings to know about. When I have one other image that I'm just going to quickly put up. Just need to get it prepared here and okay, so this one, a little bit of a smaller one, try to make it a little bit bigger. But this is what you would be after in terms of positioning the progressive over the patient's eye. So this is not something that I would imagine a lot of opticians or optometrists really are doing in practice. But if you're lucky enough to have a lab that sends back their progressives with these markings laid out on the lenses, it's very, very, very helpful for fitting the patients, right? Because as you know, when a patient gets a progressive, they've been measured for the progressive height and, the pupil height. And we're, assuming that when they put it on, everything's going to be lined up great. We don't know that 100% unless we mark up the lens and take a look, right? Now, taking the time to do that on every patient is really not something that, unfortunately, most practices are really doing. But what this would tell you, and I'm going to just kind of go over marking up a progressive in a second, this would tell you, okay, is the patient's pupil at the fitting cross? Is that making sense? Is the near area in a place that's going to make sense for them when they do look down and look, at something that's in front of them up close? So this is the point. This is what we want to have happen. If we were to mark up a progressive and have the patient put it on, this is ideally where you would want everything to be sitting. So that's an important photograph. Um, all right. So what I do want to do is I am gonna share my screen, and you're not going to let me just get this going briefly here. You're not, unfortunately, going to be able to hear the video, but let me just get it started. Of course, it's going to do a commercial, but what I'm going to do is kind of fast forward a little bit and talk you through a video of someone marking up a progressive. Let me just get this through the ad part, and then I'll share my screen here. Okay. Sorry, guys, 2 seconds. I want to get this in my window on YouTube just because that's going to look a lot better. Okay. And then I can presumably share my screen. Okay, so, all right, let's just make sure that this is sharing. Okay, perfect. So, alrighty, guys. So, what I want to do, and again, I am just gonna quickly kind of fast forward through this. But what I wanted to show you here is you can get, and I'll show you one of these in a second as well, but you can get specific progressive layout charts or marking charts from the manufacturer. So I'm going to show you a couple from Shamir because we typically use Shamir lenses. But you can also get generic ones. And so in this video here, he is showing, he kind of cuts it off, which is slightly odd, but it should have both eyes on this chart. We really only need to see the one, but usually on the right side, there's going to be, the exact same thing, this big circle as what's over there. What he's showing us is he's just kind of walking us through what this chart is all about. So where you see the ones on either, I should probably pause this, but where you see the ones on either side here, that's going to be, if you imagine laying the pair of glasses, this is something that you put right on the table in front of you, and then you take off the pair of glasses and you would lay them like face down right on this chart, and you'd get your probably not a dry erase pen, but like a lens marking pen that's actually going to stick to anti-reflective coating. And you would mark up the progressive over it. We'll go through what that looks like in a second, but just to kind of familiarize you of the chart, these marks at the one area are for the pupillary distance, so you can kind of verify by putting the frame bridge right in the center here. You can verify that the PDs, these are going to be monocular PDs, so each eye, it's not binocular, it's not in the 60s or the high 50s, it's, kind of around the 30s to 40s, so we know that it's measuring each eye individually. For PDs. And then down here where the 2 is, this is an area where we can begin to check out the seg height. That's going to help us take a look at that and tell us, kind of where that seg height measurement is going to come in once we've marked this up. And then 3 is where we're going to be putting the bridge of the frame once the frame is on the layout chart. So I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit here. Okay. He goes through, like, you can also like we never are really going to measure the top height, so I'm not even really going to talk about that. And it also goes through measuring blank size. So if you were like, how big is my lens, you could also figure that out too. Not really something you would be doing a lot. But here you can see that he has positioned the frame face down right on top of the chart. He has been careful to center it, right? So he wants the middle of the frame, to be right in the center, right above kind of this peak where the 0 is. And what he's going to do is he is going to start laying out the pair of glasses, and he's going to start drawing over it, basically marking up the progressive. So let me fast forward a little bit through here. What he's doing is he knows, I think what he's doing, typically what I would do in this case, and I think what generally would be taught to do, is to find the progressive etchings on the lens. And I'm going to show you how to do that in just a second. But typically what you would do is those etchings are showed by these 2 circles here, and you would mark those onto the actual lens, and then with like a pen, and then you would lay those right on top here and line those up with those 2 dots, and that tells you that you've lined it up at the right place in the lens. I think what he has done is he's found what the PD is that was measured for the patient, and he's kind of laid it out that way, which is another way to do it, but probably easiest to use the little etching marks. But anyway, what he's done from there is he's moved it over. He found his PD, or you could find the progressive etching dots, and then he's laid it out on the lens marker, the progressive lens marker. And what he's doing is he's marking where the fitting cross is first. And he's just gonna trace over. Is he gonna show us that part? Perhaps not. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to show, I have another video that shows this probably a little bit better. But he's basically just, going through and pointing out what the different parts of the chart are. So I have a video where I actually have someone marking it up. So let me quickly show you that. Let me just get that one started. Okay, let me just make sure you guys can. No, you're not on the right one. Okay, sorry guys. Zoom difficulties here. Let me stop sharing this one and then reshare. Okay, hold on. Get through this ad. Okay, so one more screen share for you here. Okay, so let me make this one full screen one more time. But this one, now that you kind of are familiar with what the chart looks like, he is going to go right ahead. He has a good example of having found those progressive marking etchings. Okay, so he looked at it again. I keep saying I'm going to show you this. I will. He's figured out where those dots are. He's made little black pen marks on them. And what he's going to do is he's going to use that to position it over the chart so that he can mark up the progressive. Apparently, he's going to chat for a bit first. Okay, so he's marking those little etchings with his pen. There are very specific pens that write on anti-glare coating. So if you guys have not, we should have those in each office. If you only have the dry erase pens, those are difficult to use when you're doing something like this. One, because they're big, but two, because they don't stick to AR that well. So you do need these special pens for it. And then what he's going to do is he's going to point out these two little circles. Those are super important. And he's going to line those up with that pair of glasses face down on the chart. There he goes. Okay, so he's lining up these little dots, putting them face down, trying to hold it nice and straight. And then what he's really going to do is just use this like a pattern, and he's going to mark up the progressive, do the fitting cross. Oops, this pen isn't working. And the whole purpose of this is so that you could see where the patient's eye is sitting very, very, very accurately behind the pair of glasses, right? You could, do something similar by measuring the seg height. You say the patient comes in and you're troubleshooting, you measure the seg that was measured for the patient, you mark that on the glasses, and you say, okay, the height's checking out. That's another way to do this, but this is a little bit more accurate because you're really finding out, okay, how is this lens edged? We're looking at the etchings. They're not going to be, like there's definitely, where the etchings are. Like there's not a lot of like wrong paths you can go down that way. So this is probably more accurate of a way to mark up a progressive and check that the height is right. Now, time-wise, do you have the time to do this every single time? Maybe not as much, but it's definitely something you should know how to do. Let me quickly show you a couple other things. This is good information for you guys to know. It's very practical opticianry information, but you're not actually, if you continue, with the ABO course and everything, and go on to do all three tests, this marking up of a progressive is the practical exam test. That's the last test, really. And a lot of that is just, how do you mark up a progressive? How do you identify what a progressive is? So definitely comes into play, but it's not something that's super heavily featured by any means in this current test. I'm going to do another quick whiteboard because I do want to show you just really briefly those etchings that are in a progressive. So we have, there is a tool to find these etchings, but I would say the quicker way to do this, let me just get this image in here, is to probably hold it in the light and look at it, right? So sometimes you may have seen someone kind of holding up their pair of glasses, trying to get like the glare on it just right. Sometimes if I close one eye, it's easier for me to find. But next time you have a progressive lens in the office, I would hold it up to the light, and you can see that this person is using the light to find the etchings. Okay, so this is telling us what the add power is. Here's that little circle. Sometimes patients will complain about these. They'll tell you like, "Oh, I can see this little mark in my lens," and usually they're talking about the etching. Single vision digital lenses also have this, but they wouldn't have the add power. But on the temporal side, you're going to see the add power. On the nasal side, you're going to see the progressive marking. So, and I'll show you one more image too that actually has a shamir marking, which is going to be a little bit good for our purposes because this is a marking that you would likely be seeing. So all companies that make progressives tend to have their own markings, and they look like similar to each other. So this one's a Shamir one. You can tell kind of by the S, and it has these little like arm things on either side of it. But basically you can see the add power here. It's kind of odd. It's a little bit, it's between like a 225 and a 250. And then this is the Shamir marking. So this is, if you wanted to go ahead and mark up the progressive using a chart, that little Shamir marking counts as one of the circles. And so you would put your little pen mark in that. And then there'd be another one on the nasal side that you would put your other pen mark in. And that would tell you where to position things on the chart. So, there are tools. There's a polariscope which will help you find these markings. Honestly, sometimes they can be really easy to find, and sometimes they're just really hard to find. It's kind of a pain in the neck, to be honest. Sometimes labs will etch them really deeply, and other times they're just fairly light. But if you do spend the time, you will be able to find these on all progressives. So definitely a really good thing to know about. Let me just see if there's anything else related to that that I wanted to show you. No, not too much concerning that. But basically, this again really important for to know about it. But in general, I would say not gonna come in, you know, to what you're doing a ton. I was gonna show you, let me show you real quick our the Shamir chart. So I'm just going to take a little sip of this as well. Most of the lenses that we use are Shamir lenses, and the lenses that we arguably use the most, they're pretty much always a V that we're using, or not always, but most times. And that's going to either be on the top end, the Shamir Intelligence. So this is a marking chart for a Shamir Intelligence specifically. It's also the marking chart for the or the layout chart for the autograph too. I guess they use, the same measurements basically. But this is just one that Shamir produces, and it's what is different about this that might be slightly different on other progressives is it tells you the corridors. So you can see here like the 11, the 13. There should be a 15 and an 18 on this one too. It tells you the corridors right here, 11, 13, 15, and 18. So that's the one for the intelligence. I also could show you one, and I will upload these to the contact drive too, um, because they are nice to be able to access. But basically, the InTouch is the other V-shaped lens that we use. It's the slightly like lower tier V, still a super nice lens, but that one also has its own marking chart. So just a little bit about those. All right, other things for progressives that I wanted to talk to you guys about. And I do want to go back to slab off briefly before I forget, but we'll continue with progressives for now. Things that you want to know about progressives, right? Maybe I'll put these up too, just to have something to look at. Sometimes it's just nice to have visual. But a couple notes about progressives. I gave you a a bunch of documents to take a look at, and they're, varied different information on progressives, but progressives have been around for a while. So the first one was actually patented in 1907, right? So over 100 years ago. But they really didn't come into common use until 1959. It was called a Varilux lens, so you may recognize that name. The name is still used today. So Essilor, which is the largest optical company in the world. They also own Luxottica. They also own iMed, right? So huge, huge, huge company. They own the Varilux lenses, and you'll hear the term Varilux. It's kind of just one branch or type of lenses. So you'll hear like the Varilux Comfort, the Varilux X Design, the Varilux Ovation, the Varilux Natural. There are so many different lenses that they've come out with over time, right? One of their other famous ones was, I don't know if I said this or not, but the Comfort. So now there's a Comfort Max, that's a new one, the Physio, the W3. So all of those go under the name Varilux, and they're just, it's really just branding at this point. But it was interesting that that was the first progressive lens. I didn't know that. Anyway, people didn't really start using them much until the 70s. Before that, it was really just a bifocal. Um, Things that I want you guys to be thinking about: soft lens designs versus hard lens designs. And I'm going to show you some pictures of those as well, because I think these are really great for a visual. So let me just put up an image of those. We in our offices don't usually talk about designs in terms of are they soft designs or hard designs, but I think that that's a common terminology in other practices in opticals. So I do want to talk to you a little bit about it so you're familiar with it. But basically, I feel like the image kind of explains it all. But soft lens designs have less distortion. Okay, so they kind of spread out. Sometimes I know we've talked about this before, but like almost thinking of like a sandbox analogy, like because you have three prescriptions in this lens, right? Or well, you have hundreds of prescriptions, but three main prescriptions: the distance, the intermediate, and the near. You have, because those all have to blend together and transition together, you have this level of distortion that's going to be there because of that blending, right? You have to get these three powers to be on one cohesive surface, get all the curves situated. And if you think about it, you can sweep that distortion, that kind of yucky part of the lenses blending together, kind of away in different ways. So if you imagine like you have like a plate, like a circle in a sandbox, and you have a certain amount of sand, and we'll call that sand our distortion. Um, you can sweep that sand away in different areas and make the piles high in some areas and really stack it up so there's a lot of it in some areas and no sand in some areas. But it depends, like there you can't get rid of the sand is what I'm trying to say. So in a softer design, you're kind of spreading like a small layer of that sand out in a larger area. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to get a wide corridor, and areas that, have no sand in it, but it also allows you to get areas that are just a little bit sandy, right? Like they're just a little bit blurry. Like they're not perfect vision, but they're very, very usable areas. So you can see that in the softer design. The pure white areas are much smaller than the hard design areas, but if you look at these darker areas, they're much less distorted than the ones in the harder design. So if you imagine the harder design, these dark blue areas are like lots of sand. It's all stacked up. It's like thick layers of sand. Like you really can't use those areas a lot to see it, right? Whereas the softer design, all of these light purple areas, you could probably see quite well out of those areas, maybe with a tiny bit of blur. So, benefits of a softer design is you have a wider corridor, um, less distortion overall. Harder design, you're going to have these beautiful, like clear expanses, great edge to edge, distance clarity, your corridor is going to be narrower, and you're probably going to have just some areas where it's like blech, like you don't even want to look in that area of the lens, right? So that's kind of the idea of softer designs versus harder designs. I would say if you came in and talked to the Shamir rep and were like, "Oh, is it a hard design or a soft design?" She'd be like, "Ah, that's old terminology. Like we don't really say that anymore." And I'll explain that why that is in a second, because we'll talk more about like corridor length and add power. Other thing to know, most lenses, almost 100% of lenses that are new now use prism thinning, and that's yoked prism. So if you guys remember yoked prism from when we talked about prism, yoked prism is prism that doesn't affect vision. It means it's the same in both eyes, so it makes your eyes go in the same direction so that it's really not perceptible. But what it does in this case is it allows the lenses to be an even thickness. So it makes them a little bit thinner, allows them to all be on one same plane. All right, so let's move on a little bit to corridor. And I do have some visuals there that I want to talk about as well, but I am going to just put up my notes too so that there's those as well. Okay, so with corridors, we as an office talk a lot about corridors. I would say much more so than most places. We also use lenses that are deliberately chosen because they have customizable corridor lengths. Even our base progressive, not our non-digital, that is not super customizable, but our digital lens, the Shamir Spectrum, kind of our bread and butter digital, like the B Frank digital lens, that has a customizable corridor as well. And that was important to me in choosing that lens because the corridors make a huge difference. Okay. Um, so long corridor lenses, those now I'm hoping I really didn't do a lot of images, about the parts of the progressive. Hoping you got that from the reading, but just to kind of mention, the corridor is the area, and I'm just gonna put this here. The corridor is the area here in the progressive lens where it goes from the distance power to the full reading power. Okay. So we saw in this centration chart up here that the intelligence lens comes in 11, 13, 15, and 18. So that refers directly to the length of this distance and how many millimeters it takes to get from that distance power to the full near power. Okay. So if this were, this is fairly long. So I would say, let's imagine that this one is a 15. That would mean that from this very top area all the way down to here, that would be 15 millimeters, right? Um, and then we would need to have, and this is really important, you want to have an additional 4 to 5 millimeters at the bottom so that you have ample reading area. Okay, so I look at a lot of the orders that come through, and one of the biggest things that I see is in terms of, problems or things that are a little hard to deal with after the fact is that people sometimes will order a progressive that doesn't have enough room in it. So the minimum fitting height for pretty much all of our progressives is about 17 in terms of the seg height. Okay, 17 or 18. So if we ever have a seg height that is less than that, what can very easily happen is that the reading area can get cut off. Okay, so that basically means that, if you had from maybe I'll draw it on this one. But if you had, from this area, kind of where the pupil is to the bottom of your frame here, if you have less than 17 here, that means that, the frame is essentially, let's imagine just kind of drawing, just going to make this line a tiny bit thicker. If we drew a frame over this progressive lens, right, that would mean that we would be cutting off all of this bottom area of reading area if we don't have a seg measurement that's big enough. Okay. So whenever you are fitting a patient, you want to look at them in in that frame. This is before you're even getting to sit down and do the measurement, but you want to make 100% sure that their pupil is going to provide you enough, distance to the bottom of that frame so that it's at least 17 to 18 millimeters high. Okay. That's about 3/4 of an inch. If you prefer to kind of think about it in terms of inches, but you want to make absolutely sure that there is that amount of space, because otherwise, as you can see what would happen with this, they'd have a nice bit of intermediate, but they'd have very, very, very little reading area to use. They'd have just a couple millimeters down here that they'd be like kind of desperately trying to access down at the bottom of their lens. Okay, so that's just something really important to remember, that I do see occasionally when looking at the orders. But other things in terms of corridor to think about, short corridors tend to have a lot of near. Okay, so if we are going to, think about the hourglass design, a short corridor is going to be something like this, right? So you have your distance up here, the patient's eye is here, the corridor itself is going to be pretty minimal, okay? And then they're going to have a nice large reading area at the bottom, okay? This is great for people who aren't on the computer that much. They just almost want like a bifocal, but they don't want that line. Maybe they do a lot of near work and they just, they really don't plan on using these at the computer very much, okay? Now, long corridors, they are going to be great for people that are new to progressives. It's going to reduce any kind of distortion. You could think a little bit about it in terms of like almost like a softer design progressive. It kind of gives that progressive more space for that sand, for that distortion, widens out that corridor, makes the transition from the distance to the near nice and slow and relaxed. So those are great for people that, just are new to it, or maybe they're like kind of sensitive about, visual disturbances, visual changes. That, it's a really nice comfortable way to get into a progressive. When I see orders, when I'm doing orders or entering them and I have a choice, sometimes I'll look at the seg height and I'll be like, okay, great, this person has like a 26 seg. I could choose from 11, 13, 15, 18, right? I'm always thinking, okay, total seg is 26. I want to make sure they have 4 to 5 of that reading area. But if I'm at 26 and I subtract, say 5, I'm still at 21. So that means I have my pick of the litter in terms of corridors. Usually, what I'll do is I'll look at the prescription for the patient and I'll say, okay, if they're myopic and they are relatively young, so say they're, kind of a newer progressive wearer, like they're in their 40s or early 50s, I'll tend to kind of do a longer corridor, because it's just, probably going to be a little bit more comfortable for them. It's going to give them a little bit more computer area, a little wider corridor. But if they are older, I'm presuming that they're more used to a progressive. So maybe I would go down. I wouldn't necessarily go for that 18. Maybe I'd go for that 15. Still going to be a nice long corridor, give them that computer area, but maybe they don't need quite as much of a long transition into that near power, right? We know that people sometimes get kind of upset if it takes too long for them to reach their near. Sometimes people don't want to look way down in the lens to access that near. If they're a myope, I'm sorry, a hyperope, right? So if they're a hyperope, a plus prescription, we do know in general, it's kind of a thing that myopes tend to like shorter corridors. Okay. They tend to not be into, kind of this long transition to get all the way to the bottom. If you have a patient coming in saying, oh, I have to lift up my chin so much to get to my reading area, oftentimes they are a hyperope, okay? And for whatever reason, I don't know if it's just like the anatomy of their eye or just I'm not sure what it is, but for some reason they tend to like slightly shorter quarters. They like to get into that near power nice and quick. So if I'm seeing a hyperope, I'm usually going to choose a slightly shorter corridor. I'm usually trying to stay away from the 11. I mean, that's pretty like abrupt. So, typically if I can, I'm going to choose a 13 or a 15, but just gives you a little information on some of the thought that it can go into these. Um, okay, one other thing I want to talk about, variable corridor designs versus fixed, okay? We always use fixed corridor designs. That means that we can choose whether it's going to be this 11, 13, 15, or 18. Variable is basically like the computer choosing for you. So a variable design, basically, if we ordered something in, let's say, a 23 seg, and we were like, all right, we'd like a Shamir intelligence variable, the computer would then determine what the corridor length should be. And I honestly, they don't really publicize like how the computer makes that determination. So my guess is it's just kind of like, all right, it needs 4 to 5 millimeters of near, and the seg height is this. So we're gonna go with, whatever that mathematical result is, right? I don't know. Maybe it takes into more consideration the prescription or other factors, but typically we like to choose what we get, and we don't usually use variable. So only if we have to do we use the variable. So just a little, couple words about that. Other things I should talk to you about add power and how that affects progressives. There was a ticket that I put this image in um, a while back. I do feel fairly strongly about this one. Um, with add powers and progressives, okay? So with progressives, if you have a high add power, it really changes how that progressive is going to perform for you. Okay. And I really think that this image, this is, presumably the same distance power. This is, trying to simulate that distortion that happens, when it's trying to transition from the distance power to with just a one add and transitioning to from the distance power to the near power at a three add. So you can see how much distortion this lens is having to deal with. And the areas that I really want to point out to you is the corridor, right? So this purple area, I mean, we don't typically do one ad. That's kind of low for us. But if we did, this corridor, because even this light purple area is pretty usable. This is like such a nice wide corridor, such a like expensive area for the computer, right? Whereas if you look over here, like even if I'm in that light purple, like, oh my gosh, this is so tiny on this one, right? Like it's just like blech, comparatively to this like one ad. Now, obviously you can't put people who are like, in their 50s in just like a one ad. Like that doesn't make any sense, right? But do we want to put them in a three ad? No, we don't want to put them in a three ad because look what happens with this corridor, right? Like the other thing that I would argue is with you want to think a little bit about focal distance too, right? At a three ad, your focal distance is going to be quite close to you. So, I mean, I know that sometimes you'll see people, Chris is always spotting these people that are like, looking at their phones like 6 inches away and stuff, but like most people are not doing that, right? So, with the three ad, you're really going to have to hold whatever you're looking at up close, like very, very close to you, like unnaturally close to you, right? So, I know that, there are a couple of you guys here that do refract. I'm sure you've heard this before, but if you're finding that a person is not, low vision, doesn't have cataracts, doesn't have, kind of a medical issue going on, and you're needing to give them a 3 ad, you really want to look at that distance power and make sure that they have enough plus in the distance, right? Because usually it's something that can be tweaked, and some of that 3 ad at near can be shifted into the distance if they really need that. And, it's not to say that never should there ever be a 3 ad. I'm sure there would be a lot of people who would argue with me on that. But the reason that I really don't like them is because of what they do to progressives, right? Like it's like, what are we can't tell the patients this is going to be a good thing to use on the computer if, if this is what happens when it is that high of an ad. So that's why we ideally want to be for full-blown presbyopes, in their 50s and 60s. We want to be at really a 225 at the maximum if possible. 250 is okay, but 225 is great, just because it is going to really impact their progressive and give them wider areas, especially in the computer. So a couple words about that. All right, last little bit about progressives. So a lot of the documents, or a couple of the documents that I gave you, talked about digital surfacing, and I'm just grabbing an image here, um, versus more traditional surfacing. We use all digital lenses, even our B Frank, like the base non-digital progressive is a digital lens, just because it's really easy to get digital lenses at this point. Like, it used to be kind of a thing where like you had to pay a lot more for digital lenses, but they've been around so long now that like it's not, it's like, I don't know, it's just easy for labs to make these. Now, the non-digital progressive, like our B-Frank non-digital progressive, like you can't customize the corridor, you can't customize the shape, so it has limitations for sure. But digital versus non-digital surfacing, this is kind of your traditional non-digital surfacing. So progressives used to come as a lens blanket, big thick hockey puck type of deal, and they'd have the ad power, and they still do to some extent. Like I think like a number of progressives are still done in this way, but they have the ad power built into them already, and then the distance power is buffed into them with like a large like buffing disc basically. For digital lenses, they use, or fully free-form digital lenses I should say, they use a stylus. And you can just tell even just from this kind of simple drawing that this is going to be far more accurate than, kind of a big buffing pad. So, one of the things that is a good talking point about it is that digital lenses can be ground to the thousandth of a diopter, right? The traditional style of, buff lenses is just much more one size fits all, much less customizable. So that is, one of the big advances in technology from the old traditional molded style progressives to the new. And lastly, I want to talk to you about position of wear measurements. Have some pictures for you. So we used to take more position of wear measurements. We don't really do it anymore. A couple reasons for that. One is that it takes extra time, but two is that I'm just really on the fence if labs actually use them when we enter them, but also just how much it really changes the actual lens and the patient experience. So we don't do them anymore, but this is measuring the vertex distance. So what this is important too for the test. But this basically is, positioning the distometer on the patient's eyelid and then measuring from, it's supposed to be the cornea. Obviously, you're not going to put this on the patient's cornea, but measuring from the patient's cornea to the back of the eyeglass lens. So that would be vertex distance of the glasses. So usually it's going to be something like a 12-14 measurement. Other position of wear measurements refer to frame wrap. So you guys know that lenses have base curves. Frames also have base curves. And I'm going to put up a picture. We have frame wrap charts, but you can also just look at them online or print one out for the office if they don't have one already. But basically, what you'd be doing is you can see a frame kind of drawn. This is the bridge. This is like looking down on the top of a frame. These are the temples going back here and here. But basically, it tells you how wrapped or what the base curve of this frame is. In this case, we would say that if we kind of follow this curve back, I would say it's probably going to be, it's kind of the curve ends right about here. So maybe we'd be at like a 7 base curve on this frame. We want to kind of look at the curve before it starts going back into the temple. So you'd be somewhere between like a 7 to a 10 probably on this one. But that's helpful because, if you had a super wrapped frame, it would be, much more kind of dramatic like this. So, that's another position of wear measurement that that certain progressive lenses can take into account. Last position of wear measurement is pantoscopic tilt. You guys, I'm sure, are familiar with pantoscopic tilt. Hold on, I have this selected in a funny way here, but let me show you a picture of the pantoscopic tilt and the tool that is used for it. Usually this is one that we just get from Essilor, from one of our labs. But it's basically this tool here, and it has kind of this semicircle protractor thing and then a ruler. But basically what is done in this case is this is actually the wrong picture. Why do I have this picture? Sorry. This is her doing vertex distance again because she's actually not using a distometer and she's measuring like from his eye to the back of the lens. Sorry. Let me show you the actual Panto one. Okay. So this one is the Panto image. Okay, so anyway, on this one, she's using the same tool. She's lining up the ruler thing with the edge of the temple, and she's moving that semicircle protractor like twists, and she's going to line that up with the side of the patient's frame to measure the pantoscopic tilt. Okay, so you guys know how to add panto to a frame, helps with people who are having trouble adjusting to their progressive many times. But she's going to just turn that and read. It'll tell her, it's very hard to see from this picture, but it'll tell her what the angle of pantoscopic tilt is. So vertex distance, frame wrap, and panto angle can be sent in with as custom measurements. Sometimes if you guys have seen the VSP, they have that little asterisk with custom measurements. That's what they're talking about here. Those can be sent in with the progressive lens, and presumably the lab will use them, and the progressive will come out slightly tweaked, compensated for these measurements and how that frame is sitting and on the patient's face and what the patient's prescription is. If you guys have already seen lab slips for digital lenses, oftentimes you'll see them come back and they are already compensated even without these custom measurements. So if you ever look at a lab slip and you know that you ordered like say a -1, minus a half diopter of SIL at 180. Sometimes when you look at that lab slip, you might see something like minus 0.89, minus 0.67 at axis 178. And those are digitally compensated designs, which are taking into account the patient's progressive, basically. And they are tweaking that digital lens to just work a little bit better for that patient's particular RX. So that is something you might also see. Okay, guys. So other things that I wanted to chat about, I did mention the slab off. I did give you guys a video to watch on slab off. I really don't want to get into slab off too much just because, mainly because it's just going to be like 1 or 2 questions on the test, and also because it's like really never done. So it's one of those kind of things that pops up on the test. You should know what it is. It's good optical history, but it's really not going to be something that you're ever going to use, in my opinion, day to day. So slab off is basically something that was used or could presumably be used now when people have very different prescriptions between their eyes, right? So, say you have one eye that's like a +2 in the distance, and then another eye that is a +5 in the distance, right? So, you have 3 diopters of difference between those eyes. So, you guys probably already know that sometimes the brain can have trouble merging those two images because they're going to have different amounts of magnification, right? A +2 is going to be a lot less magnified than a +5. And so the brain has to kind of put those two images together, and sometimes that's difficult. So slab off addresses that problem, but it only addresses it in the near area. So apparently, this can be more problematic for patients when they look down in the lens. Um, I think partially just because of the way lenses are, there's going to be some weird prismatic effects. Because if you're thinking about, the shape of a +5 lens versus a +2 lens, it's probably going to be quite a bit different and have more prism going on in that +5 lens than in the +2 lens. So what slab off does is it actually cuts a little bit, and I have a quick drawing I did of it. That I'm just gonna kind of put up here. But it actually cuts a piece of prism out of the lens. So something like this, if we imagine this red to be kind of the side of a lens or kind of the cross section of a lens, the prism is actually cut right out of that lens. And what it does, and let me just look at my notes here, and it is cut out of the distance portion of the lens, okay? But what it does is it makes a base up prism in the lens, and it's cut from the most minus lens. So there's a thing that on the test, good thing to remember. Oops, get that unclicked. But basically, when you're on the test, it probably will come up once or twice. You want to remember BUM. So base up, most minus. Okay, that's what, maybe I should write that. That's what the acronym is for. So base up, most minus. Um, is what they're referring to there. But basically, what it means is they're going to cut a base up prism in the lens that is the most minus lens, and that is going to make that imbalance of prescription much less problematic for the patient when they look at near. And that is, in a short version, what slab off is. All right. Other things to talk about. Gone through most of our progressive stuff. I did want to talk about a couple things that are important to know when you are working with patients in optical, because there are times when there are medical issues that are affecting their vision. Obviously, this is definitely something that could happen in the exam room, but this document that looks like this is what I just wanted to go over briefly. There are certain things that you want to be aware of that are kind of more on the medical side. Um, that could again be affecting the patient's vision, and if they're coming in with issues kind of with their glasses, or they're difficult to refract. Obviously some of this stuff is some of what could be going on, so it's good to have a little bit of background knowledge on it. So presbyopia and hyperopia, so conditions commonly causing prescription shifts. When hyperopes become presbyopic, starting slowly in their mid to late 30s. So remember that presbyopia is when the lens, the crystalline lens inside the eye hardens, and it makes it very hard to focus up close for that patient. Happens to everyone. Starting in the late 30s isn't necessarily noticeable until they get well into their 40s, or sometimes even, late 40s, early 50s, right? But basically, with hyperopes, it can be very hard because they are used to using that lens all the time. They're constantly accommodating, they're squeezing that lens, getting it into the shape that it needs to be to correct both their near vision but also their distance vision. Hyperopes can really kind of cheat the system because when they can accommodate to make not only their distance vision correct, but also their near vision correct. So sometimes, like Dr. Gosh is a great example of this. Before she had cataract surgery, I think she was like a plus 350 or a plus four. And she never knew in all of her young adult life or childhood that she needed glasses because she would just accommodate. All the time that she was awake, and she, could accommodate through both that near power and the distance power. But then once she, got into her 30s, she started noticing that both her, the first it was her near, but then also her distance vision started to deteriorate because she lost that flexibility inside her eye in that crystalline lens and was thus not able to squeeze that lens into the shape to kind of cheat, her vision. So one of the things that can be very difficult for hyperopes is that they're the kind of people that are like, well, I've never needed glasses before, but lo and behold, they're really like a plus two, or maybe even, higher than that, a plus 250 or three, and they've just kind of gotten by. But all of a sudden, once they get to their 40s, they're just having so much trouble because both their up close vision and their distance vision is really um, deteriorating a lot and becoming blurry. So they kind of get hit with like a double whammy. Myopes, they know they have crappy vision in the distance. So they're just kind of used to that. And it's not so much of a shock when they're like, oh, okay, I have to wear glasses for up close now too, right? They're usually used to wearing glasses, right? Hyperopes, they're like the kind of people that are like, well, I've never worn them, so I shouldn't have to. So that's just a good background to have on that. Cataracts. Patients who are developing cataracts will sometimes have relatively rapid myopic shifts. So if you're, seeing someone who's had a lot of change towards minus, oftentimes that's because of cataracts, right? They tend to be hard to refract at times. Maybe they can't quite get to 20/20. It's, some of those difficult scenarios. Cataract surgery. So when patients have cataract surgery, doctors implant a synthetic lens, a fake lens into the eye after removing the cataracts. And so after cataract surgery, you guys probably all know this, but the patient's prescription is pretty much always going to change, and it can change extremely dramatically. The place where that gets very tricky is when a patient has like one eye done and then they wait for like 6 months or a year to have the other eye, because then sometimes maybe they were like a -5 in both eyes beforehand, and then like one eye now is like plano because they had the surgery, but the other eye is like -5 and they like cannot see in glasses just because of that huge difference now between the two eyes. So definitely, when someone has a higher script, it makes sense to have those two surgeries closer together. But you guys have probably experienced some of that in the office where, it's kind of an adjustment, while they wait for that second eye, or even just after having had both eyes, they're used to what their vision was before, right? Even if it was not that great before. Diabetes. Uncontrolled diabetes can also cause a patient to have refractive shifts, right? So, if you're seeing someone who, maybe month to month, or even week to week, has these massive like changes, that cannot be something that's caused by diabetes. Very dry eyes. When dry eye is severe, it can cause blur. So I definitely have dry eyes. Sometimes it'll look like almost like astigmatism. It'll look like there's like a shadow around letters, like when my eyes are super dry. So that can mess with people as well. And then macular degeneration. You guys probably know something about this, but it's where, the really central area for vision degenerates, and it can cause, major, major, major issues, blindness, of course, ultimately, that could make it very, very difficult to see with glasses, right? Even, with new glasses. So these are obviously, this is not a comprehensive list, but these are very common things that, sometimes you might be trying to troubleshoot with a patient or work with a patient, and they really are just saying, I just can't see, and, why are these glasses not working for me? And it's like, definitely at times is going to be a medical issue and just something that's not really going to be fully fixable just with a refraction, right? So, okay. other things to talk about. Um, I did give you guys a some information on let me just make sure I did. Of the troubleshooting manual. So I gave you guys a link to or the PDF of our troubleshooting manual. And I like that because I just want you to be able to refer to it. I'm just going to see if I can quickly pull that up because there are a couple of parts I want to just look at. So I'm just going to share that. I think that's the right one. Okay. So with the troubleshooting manual, this is something that is on the drive, like the contact drive, and I'd really love to have it printed out in all the offices. That is easier said than done, but if you're ever kind of at a loss for what to do with a patient. If you have downtime, in the office, I would highly, highly recommend that you take some time to read through this because I would say that troubleshooting is the thing that people tell me that they are not trained on enough, right? That's the thing, the number one thing I hear from opticians who are, have been around a while is that they feel nervous troubleshooting, right? That they're not sure what's going on. I'm sure techs would say that too. They have less to do with, really kind of going into the measurements and the glasses side of things. But, sometimes you really just are not entirely sure what's going on, right? And you have to kind of eliminate things. But you also have to just really do your best to investigate. A lot of it is just listening. Um, one thing I will say, and maybe it's not the best thing to kind of say to preface a troubleshooting manual, but I really think, and again, I look at almost all the orders. I look at lots and lots of orders, and I look at the redos a lot as well, just because I really find them interesting, and I would love to. I will never get here, but I would love to figure out a way to, really, really reduce the redos, just because when you look at them, it's just it's just fascinating to see like what is being changed and from like a perspective where like I'm not seeing this patient, I'm just looking at the numbers, I'm looking at what they came in with, what their auto refraction was, what they ended up with, what their first glasses RX was, what the changes were, what their complaints were, because sometimes there'll be notes on the redo card, or sometimes like in EPM there's like notes on the appointment itself. But it's just really interesting to see like what the whole situations are, and I would say that most times it's such kind of a tweak. I'm not saying that they can't see the tweak because I believe they can. We know that people can see down to, an eighth of a diopter to 0.12. They can notice it, right, in a prescription. So I'm not saying they can't see the tweaks, but the changes are small in that, like, it's not going to make a difference between I just can't use these glasses and oh, now I can use these glasses, right? So it's kind of a thing where when you look at a lot of redos, you realize that people just need to kind of give the glasses time. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that's 100% of what goes on because I would say, there are some where a redo was absolutely necessary, whether it was a measurement thing, whether it was like a refraction thing. There are times when, we I don't want to say that like, well, like there of course are times when we make a mistake, but when for whatever reason something was not done or looked at as much as it could have been, right? So there are definitely times when we should be doing it, but I would say that 9 times out of 10, it's really that the patient needs to get used to the lens. They need to give it a bit more time. And ultimately, they need to be like, okay, am I able to make these life changes that are going to accommodate? this lens. And they really don't want to hear that. And I understand. Like no one wants to be like, okay, like, we're updating your prescription and now you need to change where your monitor is. Now you need to hold things a little bit closer. Now you need to kind of relearn, where to hold your chin, right? Like, but ultimately they need to understand that like the lens is doing everything it can. The prescription has been double checked. Like, we've done everything we can on our side. Like, there are limits to technology, and they have to kind of be like, okay, is this something that I, as a person, want to put this time into? Or do I just want to get a single vision pair of distance and a single vision pair of near? I mean, because I do think that when you look at a lot of the changes, and I'm sure, a number of you have seen this, it's tweaks and that's great, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't make the tweaks, but I think that we also don't want to give those patients like false hope that a tiny shift or tweak or tune up is going to be like this amazing difference between the first pair and the remade pair. So anyway, the troubleshooting manual goes through things you can do, things you can discuss with the patient, common problems or common answers, no, common solutions to things that people will say, right? So it does go through a little bit of like how you should present yourself and being confident, obviously listening, um, making a plan, really having kind of a plan of attack and, saying we're going to do this first, then we're going to do this, and then this will be the results, right? Having that confidence is going to help them quite a bit, even if you don't know what the answer is, right? But it does go through common complaints they might have and what to do with them. So, actually, this is the troubleshooting meetings one. Is there also a this is the one I meant to share. Sorry, guys. Um, the manual itself will, again, it goes through how to kind of present yourself, but it goes through what they might say to you. Okay. So distance vision is blurry, needs to lower chin, near vision is poor or narrow, but distance is good. Other ones, needs to turn head to the side to see intermediate or near. Wearer complains that he or she must tilt their head back to see near. Complaints of small intermediate. Complaints of not being able to find the sweet spots. Complaints of swim, sway, dizziness. Complaints of warping, spatial distortion. Complaints of double vision. So it kind of goes through common things that people would say and what can you do with adjustments for this? What might you need? And this is all really the optical side. It's not really the prescription side at all. But it's, what might you need to adjust in terms of measurements? Maybe it's the PD, it might be a little bit of the seg, might be an adjustment of the frame itself, might be something related to choosing a frame that's more similar in terms of size and shape than what they had before. So goes through the things that we can do on the optical side, not the prescription side, to help things to improve the situation for the patient. Um, doesn't go into a ton of coaching the patient, but I do think that that's a big part of this as well. And there's some good information on that. I did link the video about how to use a progressive, kind of a progressive trainer for new patients. That's on our website that Chris goes through. But a lot of it is training patients to use progressives, talking them through it. And I do know people will come in and they will say, one of the things I hear a lot too is like, oh, they've worn progressives before. Why are they having an issue with this one? Okay. So, yeah, I can understand why that would be really frustrating, right? Couple things that it could be, most likely a change in ad power is going to really affect a patient, right? Progressives get a lot more serious, as we saw in that picture, when the ad power is higher, right? So if you were kind of a crappy, lazy progressive user before, once you get up past a 2 ad, you got to be like knowing how to do this, right? You've got to find your computer zone. You've got to know how to hit your near zone, right? So that could be definitely one thing is they're used to maybe like a 150 ad, right? And all of a sudden now they're at like a 2 or a 225. Um, is it a change in design? People often ask that. I would say most often a change in design is not going to dramatically change a person's experience with a progressive. Okay. Once they've had a progressive, right? It's not to say that when you get a progressive, you shouldn't optimize the design for how you use it. I 100% believe in that. However, if you've had a progressive, say you've had a V shape and you're having some trouble with it, I would not recommend going into a barrel shape, right? Um, the reason for that is that I think that with a V shape, unless you have an extremely high ad, by that I mean like a 275 or 3, your intermediate is going to be ample enough, right? You know, if you maybe you have a high ad and you have an 11 corridor, I would be like, okay, like we need to, think about a different progressive design or a deeper frame or something like that. But 9 times out of 10, I would say, changing the progressive design at that point is not going to make a huge difference for that patient. The patient either needs to learn to use their progressive better, change the height of their monitor so it's more optimal for how they want to use it, or they really need to get a single vision computer pair. And then kind of their all the time progressive pair is what they wear out, when they go out to dinner, when they're at the supermarket, when they're reading the newspaper, when they're watching TV, they wear that most of the time, but they have that single vision computer pair for when they're at work, right? So, um, one thing I would also say is if I think Phoebe made this point, I think it's a really good point, is we want to talk to patients about progressives and about what the benefit of all of the shapes are. But we also don't want to give the patients the idea that they're going to be magical and like that there won't be some level of learning to use them, right? We want to set the expectation to some extent, right? Progressives are in some ways somewhat magical because they have 3 prescriptions in one lens and you just have one pair of glasses and that's awesome, right? But they are something that, especially on that computer, you do have to learn, where those zones are, where, how wide can you get, when you're sitting, 2 feet from your monitor. Are you going to have to learn to move your chin back and forth to track, to read all the words on the screen? There are certainly ways to optimize the zones, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be without any level of effort. So we should, when people are first time progressive wear, we should, be positive about the progressive. Absolutely. We should talk about the designs, but we should also, let them know that, they do take a little bit of time to adjust to figure out. But once you do that, you don't even know you're doing it. It's just, your day to day. You just get very used to it. So, all right. So that was a lot of progressive talk. I am going to start to go through a couple of the practice questions. I know we don't have a ton of time, but I do still want to begin with it. And then for our last meeting, we will also continue with that. Just going through a mock test. So I'm going to get a whiteboard up and put up a couple practice questions. So I have lots of practice tests. So if you are someone who plans on doing the test, these are going to be very good things to refer back to. Okay, so I would absolutely, in studying for the test, come back to this video and the next one and take a look at all of these sample questions. So first one I'm going to put up here. And again, I can send you more of them. I did give you guys some, all of these ahead of time just in case you wanted to take a look ahead. But so first question, this measurement is found by doubling the distance from the geometric center of a lens to its farthest apex. Is it A, seg drop, B, optical center, C, effective diameter, or D, the distance between the lenses. So big part of test taking is elimination, right? It's great to study and to um, know your stuff, but it's also really good to be good at taking tests, right? So you want to know what you can eliminate. So if you're an optician, I am putting up this picture just to show you. But if you're an optician and you're like, okay, distance between lenses, DBL, that's like the bridge measurement, you can immediately be like, okay, like some of these just don't make sense, right? Distance between lenses, like, are we ever doubling that? No, right? So we can immediately kind of get that one out of here. Optical center, that really only refers to lenses. That never really refers to frames. Um, but maybe you're thinking about it. Seg drop. Um, Doubling the distance of the geometric center to its farthest apex, seg drop makes no sense too. So the answer in this case is C, the effective diameter. Okay, so the ED measurement. And that is if you double the geometric center is going to be the very center of the frame. This is the frame boxing system, all right? So if you double um, the distance of from the center to the farthest apex, whichever direction, and it could be this way too, whoops, whichever direction that may be, you're going to double that, and that's going to be your ED, so effective diameter. Okay, so in this case, the answer is going to be C for this question. All right, and then let's go down, do a couple more before we have to finish up. Okay, so next one we have is widening the bridge area of a frame would be useful when A, the frame is resting too low on the patient, B, the progressive fitting cross is too low in relation to the patient's pupil, C, the trifocal segment is too high, or D, the patient's eyelashes are touching the eye wire. Okay, so in this case, they're widening the bridge. Okay, so that's hard to do on a xyl frame. But with a frame with nose pads, imagine pushing those nose pads out, the frame is going to lower. Okay. So A doesn't make any sense because the frame is already we wouldn't make it lower if it's already too low, right? Um, B, the progressive fitting cross is too low. Again, doesn't make any sense because if it's already too low, why would we lower it, right? C, the trifocal segment is too high. That could definitely be it. Or D, the patient's eyelashes are touching the eyewear. D doesn't make sense because if you lower something, like that's not going to help. If you wanted to get them away from the eyelashes, you'd move the nose pads back, like toward the patient to like pull the frame away from the patient's eyes. So the answer in this case is again going to be C. The trifocal segment is too high. So basically, lowering the frame makes sense because you're going to line that up with the patient by lowering it. So the test is generally a combination of questions that are somewhat difficult and questions that are kind of like, oh yeah, of course. All right. Next one is going to be vertex distance. Oh, and then also just memorizing things. That's another thing. Vertex distance can be defined as the distance between the lenses, or the DBL, otherwise known as bridge. B, the distance from the corneal surface to the back of the eyeglass lens. C, the distance from one pupil to the other while the patient is fixated on infinity. Or D, half of the B measurement minus the seg height. So in this case, it's not, vertex is not the bridge. Again, you kind of just have to know this one. We did talk about it just a little bit ago. So not the DBL, the distance from the corneal surface to the back of the lens. That's what it is. It's not C. C is the PD. And it's not D, half of the B minus the seg height. No. So it is going to be in this case B. relatively straightforward, but again, just kind of one of those ones that you have to know what vertex is. Here's another one that you just kind of have to know coming up. Lots of questions like this one. So memorizing indexes of lens materials is very, very helpful. What is the refractive index of CR39? So CR39 is plastic, very traditional optical material. What I would do is remember that poly is typically considered like 159. So that'll help you eliminate. I'm going to make this bigger, but this might help you as good information. But this is kind of poly is actually what the first one is. Um, crown glass is another good one to memorize, and that's 152. You guys know that CR39 is not 167. So that helps you deduce that it's B. B is basically like 150 or 149 is what CR39 is. So again, kind of another one that's hard to do without just memorizing, right? So, but I would most definitely, if you're going to take the test, memorize the indexes for sure. Okay, this one. This goes back to lens, like the nominal lens formula. Talked about that a while back. Okay, when using a lens clock, so remember the little pins that you put on your lens, to measure the distance portion power of a one-piece multifocal, so I'm thinking they're kind of talking about a progressive, position the pins A, directly on top of the segment line, B, horizontally above the segment line, C, vertically above the segment line, or D, multifocal lenses cannot be measured with a lens clock. Okay. So basically in this case, you want to remember that on the front of the lens, there will only be one curve, right? Um, so wait, hold on here. I think I'm not thinking about this one right. Um, you know what this, I don't have good notes on this one. Sorry, guys. I'm gonna have to go back and look at this one and figure out like what exactly they're asking in this case. And I think because I'm getting confused about the one piece multifocal. I'm like, do they mean like a fused bifocal? So let me go back and do a little bit of research on this one and we'll return to this one next class. But this one is a little bit tricky and it's a little confusing just because there are so many about the segment line. But then I'm also like, wait a second, can you do multifocal lenses with a lens clock? You shouldn't be able to do a progressive with a lens clock. So anyway, I'm gonna return to this one, but let's move on to the following one. This one, okay. So this question, higher index lenses transmit blank light than lenses of lower indexes. Okay. So this one is tricky, right? This one is you're going to kind of need to have memorized stuff, but you're also then going to have to use that knowledge to kind of deduce the answer in this case. So, what I would recommend kind of doing first is again starting with like elimination, right? So, if you're saying higher index lenses transmit blank light less than lenses of lower indexes or indices, indeterminable doesn't make a lot of sense, right? They're not going to ask you a question and have the answer be, oh, we don't actually know, right? So you could, I'm not saying you can 100% be like it's not D, but most likely that's not the case. Same thing with C. Equal is going to be one that I would say is not making a ton of sense either. Like, why would they ask it if, like, oh, everything's always equal? So, most likely it's going to be A or B, more or less. Okay. And so, what I did was I did look up a little bit of information on this one from our notes, and there is a little bit on reflection and light transmittance, and I'm just going to post that briefly here. This is from one of our PDFs, and it says that all lenses reflect and transmit light to varying degrees. Reflectance is how much light is reflected off the lens material. Transmittance is how much light is transmitted through the lens material. The average reflection off a lens is 8%, 4% from each side of the lens. The amount of reflectance increases with the index of material. Okay, so how much reflections? And again, this can go back to some of your knowledge of like, okay, it's way more important to have anti-reflective coating on our higher index lens than it is on a lower index lens. I mean, you want to have it on everything, but higher index lenses have more reflections. Okay. So that's going to tell you that B is the answer, right? Because higher index lenses transmit less light through them because they reflect more light off of both surfaces. Okay. So in this case, you kind of have to know, the theory behind it, and then you have to kind of watch out for your question and see, in this case, how are they asking it? Okay. All right, guys. I know that it's 9. I want to let you go. I do want to, yeah, there's another question that's similar coming up, but we'll start again with that one. I'm gonna go look up this lens clock one because I'm stumped on that one. But we have a number more questions to go through in the last class. We'll go through lots of different stuff so that you can, refer back and have a much easier time going through the test itself. All right, guys. Thank you. Talk to you guys all soon. Have a good
Thank,
night.
thank you. Have a good night.
You.
Bye bye.
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 But